Thanks for staying with us. Niger's Army Command has come out in support of yesterday's coup by presidential guard soldiers. It says its priority is to avoid destabilizing the West African nation. The army says it needs to preserve the physical integrity of the president and his family and avoid a bloodbath while protecting the security of the population. Earlier, President Mohamed Bazoum and Foreign Minister Hassoum Massaoudou urged democratic forces in the country to resist the power grab. Late last night, a group of soldiers appeared on national television claiming to have ousted Bazoum. Yesterday, the president was detained by his own guards at the presidential palace. An army spokesperson has announced that the country's borders have been closed and a national curfew is in place. And international news editor Sophie Mokoena is standing by to speak to us. Sophie, give us the very latest on what's happening there. Is there a coup or what's going on?
Well, clearly there is a coup, as you pointed out earlier on, that now the army is supporting the presidential guard. You know that yesterday the army said that they were going to attack the presidential guard and they were persuading them to leave the palace. But last night, midnight, they did announce that they now have a support of an army, and we saw that media briefing on the national television where the army was making that announcement. And now as we speak, the army is in control. We saw many people in Niger, in the capital city, holding the Russian flag, which is becoming a trend in West Africa. The same did happen when there was a coup in Mali, Burkina Faso, and therefore yesterday, as I pointed out, that it looks like that whole Sahel region is becoming a nightmare for the West, and clearly Russia making inroads, and therefore there is indeed a coup in that country. Earlier on, before I came here, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, spoke very harsh about the issues that are happening there in Niger, saying that as the world body, they don't support what has transpired there, the removal of a leader, a democratically elected leader. But it's happening. There's a coup in Niger.
And do we know where the president is currently?
It's not clear where the president is currently, but there are reports that he is still at the palace, but you don't get a sense that he is speaking to anybody. Earlier on this morning, the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, said that he did speak to him, but it's not clear, because when you look at those who are supposed to communicate with him, I'm talking about the presidency in that country, there is no clear communication in terms of where he is and perhaps where to from here. But the reality is the army is now in control.
And it's going to be interesting then to see what kind of developments emerge from this one. But there's also, of course, the Russia-Africa summit that is currently taking place. What came out of President Vladimir Putin's speech?
Well, I think for me what is important is that Putin was able to cement his authority in terms of trying to ensure that he does demonstrate to the West or his enemies that he does have friends, some friends on the continent. Because when you compare this summit and the previous summit, the number of heads of state who went to St. Petersburg, it's not the same number, but clearly he was very strong. You can see that they are well organized. One thing that also happened there, he gave the president of Zimbabwe, Emmerson Mnangagwa, a presidential helicopter. And on the other hand, he did make major announcements in terms of how he is going to deal with African leaders in terms of assisting some of the poorer nations, particularly as you are aware that he did make an announcement last week that he was not going to renew the grain deal, and therefore announcing that countries such as Zimbabwe, Mali, Somalia will get that grain from Russia. Let's take a listen at what he had to say about giving poorer countries grain, and they are not going to pay.
Россия в лице официальных кругов, бизнеса, общественности.
Russia is interested in deepening cooperation with Africa. The West tried to hamper Russian grain export to Africa, including humanitarian assistance. And Russia can provide 6 African countries with grain for free.
Перебойное снабжение африканских стран продуктами питания.
The visuals there, you saw the president of Mali and Burkina Faso wearing military fatigue. These are leaders from West Africa. You have this coup in West Africa, and Niger was very sympathetic to the West, and therefore it is going to be a problem for countries such as the United States of America, France, and their friends to have support in West Africa where they are trying to fight the insurgents. And therefore you can see there is so much happening on the continent, outside the continent, in the continent. And also you can see that there's some attempts by President Putin to ensure that the whole continent, he does have friends. And therefore clearly when you look at what transpired in West Africa, when you see those leaders wearing those military fatigue, it speaks to Russia is also very strong in West Africa. They are involved in assisting the military in those countries where you now have military governments.
And speaking, to some of the analysts who are watching these developments, they say we might even see more of some of the instability in some of the other countries in the West. But thank you so much for your time. Do appreciate it. That is SABC News International editor Sophie Mokoena talking to us about developments in Niger. We'll continue to bring you more on this particular developing story.